Hey, before you settle in tonight, I want to tell you where we are actually going, because it is not the pretty little house you're picturing. Tonight you're going underground, not into a cabin with a warm window and a curl of smoke from the chimney, into a hole. A room dug straight into the side of a creek bank with walls of raw earth, a roof of willow branches and sod, and a single door facing the water. This is a real place. Real people lived their winters inside it. And the family who lived here is a family you already know, even if you have never once pictured them like this. They were the Ingalls family, Charles and Caroline, and their girls, Mary and Laura and baby Carrie. The same family from the books you grew up on, the same little house on the prairie. Except the books left this part soft and small, the way you fold a hard thing in a cloth so it does not cut you. Tonight we're going to unfold it. Because for 2 of the hardest years of their lives, the Ingalls family did not live in a little house at all. They lived in the ground, and the winters they spent down there would have broken most people alive today inside of a week. So, here is the quiet question I want you to carry with you as you drift off. Could you have lasted 1 winter in that dugout? 1 single winter, with the cold pressing in through the dirt, the food running low, the wheat gone, and the nearest help a long white mile away over the snow. By the end of tonight, you will know exactly why almost no one could, and you will understand why this family, who survived so much, came so close to not surviving this. If you enjoy the slow ones like this, a like and a subscribe help more than you'd think, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight. And if you'd ever like to bring a little piece of this world home, our 3 little books live at prairiesecrets.com. Just scan the QR code on your screen. Or, if you're listening on your phone, you'll find the links waiting in the description and the pinned comments below. No hurry at all, they'll still be there in the morning. You do not need to stay awake for it. That is the whole point. Let the story do the work. If you drift off in the middle, the dugout will still be here when you wake, and so will they. Dim the lights. Get warm because they could not. And let us go down the creek bank together into the year 1874, into the dark under the grass. Before we go down into the ground, let me put you in the wagon that brought them there, because a family does not simply appear at a creek bank. They arrive at the end of a long, cold, jolting road, and the road is part of what made the dugout feel, at first, like a mercy. It is winter, the very start of the year 1874, and you're travelling in a covered wagon across a country with almost nothing in it. There are no towns for long stretches, no lights at night, no sound after dark but the wind and the creak of the wagon and the slow, patient breath of the animals. You sit on hard boards with your sisters, wrapped in every quilt the family owns, and the cold comes in under the canvas no matter how tightly it is tied, and the miles go by so slowly that a single day of them can feel like a week. You are a child. You do not fully understand where you are going or why. You only know that home is not a place anymore. Home is this wagon. Home is wherever your mother and father are, and the world outside the canvas is enormous and white and does not end. And then you come to a river, and the river is the Mississippi, and it is frozen. Your father gets down and studies the ice. This is the kind of decision that a frontier father made with his stomach as much as his mind, because the ice on a great river is a gamble with your whole family loaded into the wager. Too thin, and it takes you down into black water under a white ceiling and no one ever finds you. But it is winter, and it is cold enough, and he decides. And so you cross the Mississippi River not on a bridge and not on a boat, but on its frozen back, the wagon wheels grinding over the ice, the whole family holding still and quiet as though stillness itself might keep the ice from hearing you. And beneath the boards, beneath the animals, beneath everything, the deep, cold river slides on in the dark, indifferent, waiting to see whether the ice will hold. It holds. You reach the far bank. You are in Minnesota now. And somewhere ahead, still unseen, is a creek called Plum Creek, and a hole in a bank that is going to be your home. I give you that crossing not for drama, but because it tells you the truth about these people that our comfortable century keeps forgetting. Every ordinary thing they did contained a risk that would stop your heart today. Crossing a river, choosing a piece of land, planting a field, having a baby, getting through a winter. There was no safety net under any of it, no rescue coming, no phone to call, no one who would even know for weeks if the whole family vanished off the face of the plains. They lived every single day out at the edge of what a human being can survive, and they did it so steadily, so without complaint, that their own descendants would grow up thinking of it as a cozy children's story. It was not cozy. It was the frozen Mississippi under the wheels over and over in 100 different shapes. Let me set the scene honestly, the way the record set it, and not the way the television softened it. In February of 1874, the Ingalls family crossed the frozen Mississippi River on the ice, moving west into Minnesota. They were looking, the way Charles Ingalls was always looking, for the next good place, and that spring he found one, a stretch of land about 1.5 miles north of a small settlement that would come to be called Walnut Grove, along the banks of a slow, clear stream named Plum Creek. Charles filed a claim on it, 172 acres of prairie and water and sky. It was, by every account, a beautiful spot, and I want you to hold that word, beautiful, because it matters. This was not a family fleeing to the worst land left. They chose this place because it was lovely, because the creek ran clear over its stones and the grass came up green, and the plum trees along the bank would flower white in the spring. They arrived full of hope. That is what makes what came next so hard. Now, here is the detail the books turn into a small adventure, and the truth turns into something colder. There was already a home on that land, but it was not a house. It was a dugout, a single room that some earlier settler had scooped straight out of the side of the creek bank, roofed over with a woven lattice of willow branches and long strips of cut sod laid across the top. From the outside you would barely have seen it. Just a low door and a stovepipe set into a swell of grassy earth, as if the hill itself had grown a mouth. Grass grew right up and over the roof. In summer, cattle could walk across the top of the Ingalls family home without ever knowing a family was breathing beneath their feet. And to get it, Charles Ingalls made a trade that tells you everything about how much this cost him. He gave up the horses, their 2 horses, Pet and Patty, and Pet's young colt, a long-legged little thing named Bunny. On the frontier, horses were not a luxury. They were how you crossed distance, how you pulled the plough, how you ran for a doctor in the dark, how you got out if you had to get out. To trade your horses was to trade your legs and your escape at the same time. Charles handed them over for a hole in the ground and a small stable, and with that trade the family was, in a very real sense, anchored to that creek bank. They could not easily leave now. They had sold the thing that leaving required. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because it is the first hinge of the whole story. Everything that happens to them over the next 2 winters happens to people who have already given away the horses. Remember that when the wheat is gone and the snow comes, they cannot simply ride away. They traded that option for a roof of sod. It comes back. So let us go down the steps and inside, the way Laura did as a girl. Only this time, it is you. You duck your head at the low doorway, because the door is built for a child's height and you are not a child. The light drops away behind you. For a breath you can see nothing at all, and then your eyes begin to find the room, and the room is small. Smaller than you were ready for. The walls are earth. Not boards over earth. Earth. You reach out in the dimness and your fingertips meet cool, packed soil, a little damp, smelling of roots and river, and the deep cold that lives under a hill. Someone has smoothed these walls by hand. You can feel the faint ridges where a palm pressed and shaped them. Above you the roof is a woven ceiling of willow, and through the willow, holding back the whole weight of the prairie, is a foot of sod. Grass grows on the far side of that ceiling. When it rains, you will learn, the roof drips for 2 days after the sky has gone blue again, because the earth up there holds the water and lets it down slowly like a wrung cloth. There is one small window, or something a settler decided to call a window, letting a pale square of daylight fall onto a dirt floor swept hard and clean. There is a stove, and the stovepipe runs up through the sod. There is a bed and a table, and almost nothing else, because there is almost no room for anything else. The whole family will eat here, sleep here, dry their wet clothes here, wait out the storms here, live an entire winter of their one short lives inside a space smaller than many bedrooms you have slept in. And here is the strange thing, the thing you would not expect. It is not, at first, unbearable. In summer, the earth around you keeps the room cool when the prairie above is baking. In the deep of winter, that same earth will hold a little warmth against the killing wind, so that a dugout, oddly, could be one of the warmer homes a poor family owned. The ground is a heavy blanket. That is the mercy of the place. But a blanket of earth is also a weight. There is no seeing out. There is no real air but the door and that one dim square. When the blizzards come and the snow seals the doorway, you are not in a home anymore. You are inside the hill, and the hill is closed over you, and you wait, and you listen to the wind go over the grass on your roof, and you count the days by a sense you slowly lose. If your eyes are getting heavy right about now, that is all right. That is the earth doing to you what it did to them, pulling you down and quiet and slow. You do not have to fight it. Let the wind on the roof keep going without you. We will still be here. Before we walk into their first summer, let me widen the picture for a moment, because the Ingalls family were not strange, and they were not alone, and understanding that makes what they endured heavier, not lighter. All across the great treeless middle of the continent, in these same years, tens of thousands of families were doing exactly what the Ingalls were doing. They were living in the ground. On the open plains there was no timber to build with, no forest to cut a cabin from, sometimes not a single tree in sight from horizon to horizon, and so people built their homes out of the only material the prairie offered in abundance, which was the prairie itself. They cut the tough matted sod into heavy bricks and stacked them into walls. They dug rooms back into the sides of hills and creek banks. They roofed it all with more sod laid over willow or over whatever poor sticks they could find. A whole civilization of people lived for a time inside the earth, in homes that would dissolve back into the ground the moment they were left alone. And it was hard in ways that were simply accepted, because there was no alternative to accept instead. The roofs leaked, always. A sod roof shed a rainstorm for about a day, and then began to drip, and it dripped brown, muddy water for days after, so that a woman might hold an umbrella over her stove to cook, or move the baby's cradle 3 times in a night chasing the one dry corner. Snakes came through the walls, because the walls were soil, and soil is where snakes live, and a settler might look up from supper to see one easing out from between the sod bricks above the door. Dirt sifted down constantly, into the food, into the bedding, into the hair of sleeping children. Bugs lived in the walls. The floor was the earth. This was not the poverty of a few unlucky people. This was the ordinary condition of the ones who went out to break the plains, the price of admission to the dream of free land, and most of them paid it without complaint because complaint changed nothing, and the land was, they still believed, worth it. I tell you this so that you understand the scale of what you're really looking at tonight. When you picture the Ingalls family and their hole in the creek bank, do not picture an unlucky exception. Picture the leading edge of a whole people, hundreds of thousands of them, mothers and fathers and children all living underground, all doing this same slow sum of fuel and food and cold, all of them betting their lives on a piece of ground and a coming crop. Most of their names are gone now. Most of their dugouts are, like the Ingalls dugout, only a soft dent in a field somewhere that no one can find. The reason you know this one family at all, out of the hundreds of thousands, is the little girl at the school with the slate. Everyone else went down into the same earth and simply was not written down. Now, if the whole story were only hardship, it would not hold you, and it would not have held them. So let me tell you about the good season first, because you cannot understand what they lost until you have stood in the middle of it and felt how much there was to lose. The first summer on Plum Creek was, by Laura's own memory, close to paradise. The creek ran clear and cold over a bed of smooth stones, and on hot afternoons the girls could wade in it, could feel the little fish nibble at their bare ankles, could lie in the shallows and watch the light come apart on the water. Along the banks grew a thicket of wild plum trees, and in their season those trees went white with blossom and then heavy with fruit, and the whole low ground smelled of sweetness and running water. There were birds. There was a great flat table of grey rock the children played on. There was a swimming hole. For two little girls who had spent their short lives in wagons and one-room cabins, this was a kind of wealth they had never had, the wealth of a beautiful place with time to be a child in it. And above the creek, on the open prairie, Charles Ingalls did the thing he had crossed half a continent to do. He broke the sod. He planted wheat. You have to understand what wheat meant to a man like Charles Ingalls in that year. It was not just food. It was the future, pressed into the ground and covered over. A good wheat crop on new prairie land could pay off every debt a family carried and leave money over. It could turn a dugout into a house, a claim into a farm, a hard year into a soft one. Men called it a wheat crop, but what they meant was next year, and the year after, and the girls in shoes that fit, and the winter you did not have to be afraid of. Charles looked at his green field coming up thick, and even in the good black soil, and he saw all of that. He let himself believe it, and who would not? So stand out there with him for a moment in that first summer before anything has gone wrong. The wind moves across the young wheat and the whole field leans and shivers like the surface of a lake. You can hear the creek below and the wind above and nothing else. No engines, no voices, nothing that was not there 1,000 years before you. The sky is enormous. The soil under your feet is rich and dark and new. You have given up your horses and dug your home into a hillside, yes, but look at this. Look at what is coming. In a few weeks that green will turn to gold, and the gold will turn to money, and the money will turn to everything you have promised the people you love. For one summer, you let yourself rest inside that certainty. You have made it. You are almost sure of it. You have made it. I want to stop you right there, at the top of that feeling, because that is exactly where they were standing when it began. Not at the bottom, at the top. Everything I am about to tell you happens to people who, one afternoon, felt completely safe. I told you the creek was both the family's greatest gift and a quiet danger that did not care whether you lived. Let me give you the day that danger nearly collected, because Laura carried it the rest of her life, and it is the kind of memory that tells you how thin the line really was. It has rained hard somewhere up the country, and the creek that is usually clear and gentle and knee-deep has changed overnight into something else. It has risen. It has gone brown and fast and loud, and where there was a friendly stream to wade in there is now a rushing muscle of water pulling hard between the banks, and it is to a child the most thrilling and terrible thing in the world. You have been told, of course, to stay away, and you are a child who cannot quite stay away from the deep and the fast and the forbidden, and so you go down to look, just to look, because looking is not the same as going in, and the water calls you. Moving water does that. It has a pull that gets into your body below your thinking, a hypnotism of noise and motion, and you edge closer and closer to feel the cold spray, to be near the roar of it, and then your foot finds a place that is not as solid as you thought, or the bank gives, or the water simply reaches up, and in one sickening instant the solid world tilts, and the brown water has you. It is astonishingly strong. There is no arguing with it. It does not care that you are small, that you are loved, that your mother is a quarter-mile away keeping the fire. It simply takes you, the way it would take a stick, and pulls, and the cold closes over your legs and drags, and in that one heartbeat, the whole warm, ordinary life you were living becomes a thing that might, right now, this second, be ending. And then, in Laura's remembering, a hand, a branch, a root, a lucky footing, the edge of the bank, something to grab, and you grab it with the animal strength that comes up out of a body that does not want to die. And you hold, and you fight the pull, and you drag yourself back up out of the brown water onto the solid grass, and you lie there shaking, soaked, alive, listening to the creek roar on past exactly as loud and exactly as indifferent as it was a moment before, when it nearly had you. I give you that not to frighten you as you settle down. but because it is the truest small picture of the whole life these people lived. The line between an ordinary afternoon and a family tragedy was that thin, and it was everywhere all the time, in the creek and the fire and the fever and the sky. A modern child is wrapped in 100 invisible safeties. Theirs were not. A wet bank, a curious heart, and a rising creek, and a beloved daughter is simply gone, and there would have been no story, no books, no little house, nothing, only a small grief on a lonely claim that the world would never have heard about. It did not happen. She held on. But it so nearly did, in one shape or another, every single day. Rest in the mercy that this time the water let go. Before the wheat and the ruin, let me walk you into the little town, because the Ingalls family did not live entirely alone, and the small world of that settlement holds one of the most human threads in the whole story, a thread you will recognise instantly, because it is the oldest childhood ache there is. The town was called Walnut Grove, and I want you to lower whatever picture the word town has put in your head, because it was almost nothing. A scatter of raw wooden buildings on the open prairie. A church going up board by board as the people could afford it. A schoolhouse. A store. A handful of families. That was the whole of it. A tiny huddle of human effort in the middle of an ocean of grass, a day's memory from anywhere else. And to the Ingalls girls walking in from their dugout a mile and a half out, it was the big world. It was society. It was where the other children were. So walk into the store with them, because the store is the heart of it. You push open the door and a little bell rings and the smell reaches you first. The smell of a frontier store, of coffee and leather and new cloth, and somewhere, sweetness. There are bolts of printed calico stacked on the shelves in colours you almost never get to wear. There are barrels and tins, and there, under the glass, there is the candy, the striped sticks and the bright drops, a small glittering hoard of everything a poor child wants and almost never gets. You stand in front of that glass in your faded, made-over dress, with your bare feet or your outgrown shoes, and you look at the candy and the calico, and you feel two things at once, the pure wanting of a child, and something colder underneath it. The first cold understanding that there are children who can walk in here and simply be given these things, and that you are not one of them. Because the family that ran that store had a daughter, and the daughter had everything the Ingalls girls did not. Store-bought dresses, ribbons, a whole world of small luxuries. Her name, in the real history behind the books, was Nellie Owens, and if that name rings even a faint bell, it is because Laura Ingalls Wilder, 60 years later, would take that girl and others like her and forge them into one of the most famous villains in all of American children's literature, the mean girl in the fine clothes, the one every reader loves to hate. She called that character Nellie Olson. But the ache underneath the character was real, and it was felt right here, in this store, by a poor country child in a made-over dress, who understood for the first time what it meant to be looked down upon by someone who had more. I point this out because it is the moment the story stops being far away and becomes you. You may never sleep in a dugout or watch a swarm eat your food, but every single person listening to me tonight knows exactly what it feels like to be the child in the wrong clothes, standing in front of the thing you cannot have, next to the child who can. That feeling is 150 years old in this story, and it is as old as people, and Laura carried it her whole life, and turned it, like she turned everything, into something millions of us would recognise as our own. The dugout was rare. The wound in that store was universal. We have spoken of the cold and the locusts, but the open prairie had other ways of trying to kill the people who lived on it, and a family in a dugout met all of them with almost no defence at all. Picture a summer afternoon. The heat lies heavy on the grass, and then you notice, along the horizon, a smudge of brown, and the smell reaches you before the sight makes sense, the smell of burning grass, and you understand with a lurch of your whole body what is coming. Prairie fire. On a dry year, with a wind behind it, a prairie fire is not a campfire grown large. It is a wall. It is a line of flame that can run across the open land faster than a horse can gallop, throwing up a roll of black smoke that blots the sun, eating the grass sea in a roar you feel in your chest, and there is nowhere to hide from it, because the fuel is the ground itself. The fuel is everything in every direction all the way to the edge of the world. Settlers fought these fires with the only things they had, with wet sacks and shovels and desperate backfires lit, to burn a bare strip. The big fire could not cross, working in the smoke and the heat with their children watching from the wagon, knowing that if the wind shifted wrong they would lose the house, the crop, the animals, and possibly each other, in a matter of minutes. Or picture the storms. On the plains, the sky's the whole world, and when it turns with nothing to break it. You watch a green-black wall of cloud climb the western sky in the afternoon, and you feel the air go still and strange and the temperature drop, and then it is on you. Hail the size of stones hammering down out of the sky, flattening the very wheat you were praying over, or a wind that leans on the house like a living hand, or, worst of all, the low finger of a funnel dropping out of the cloud and touching the earth and walking across it, unmaking everything it touches. There was no warning for any of this beyond your own eyes. No siren, no forecast, no basement, if you did not count the dugout itself, which, in a strange mercy, was one of the few homes on that prairie that a tornado could pass directly over and leave standing, precisely because it was already in the ground. And there, at last, is the strange double truth of the dugout that I have been circling all night, and I want to name it plainly now. The hole in the ground that was so hard to live in, so dark and cold and close, was also, against fire and wind and tornado, one of the safest places a poor family could be. The earth that pressed in on them also shielded them. The same walls that felt like a grave were, when the sky came down in flame or funnel, closer to an armour. That is the paradox these people lived inside every single day. The thing that was hardest to endure was also, sometimes, the only thing that kept them alive. Remember that when we go down for the last winter. The dugout was a trial and a refuge at once, and they never had the luxury of hating it completely, because more than once it was the reason they were still breathing. There is one more thing the town gave the Ingalls girls, and it is the thing that, in the very long run, mattered more than all the rest of this story put together, though no one standing in that dugout could possibly have known it. The town gave them a school, so walk the 1.5 miles in, morning after morning, a country child going to town to learn. The schoolhouse is one room, one teacher, one stove, and children of every age, from the little ones just learning their letters to the big boys nearly grown, all taught together in the same close space. You share your bench, you share your books, because books are precious and few. You write your sums on a small slate with a screech of chalk and wipe it clean and write again, because paper is far too dear to waste on practice. You recite out loud, standing, when your turn comes. And for a poor girl from a hole in a creek bank, this room is a doorway into something enormous, into words, into the wider world, into the discovery that inside a book a person can go anywhere, be anywhere, live 1,000 lives without ever leaving the prairie. Mary, the eldest, was the natural scholar, the good and careful student, the one who loved her lessons and did them beautifully. Laura was the restless one, the one who would rather have been down at the creek, the one with the quick temper and the wandering mind and the stubborn streak a mile wide. And yet it was Laura, the restless one, who was drinking something in during these years without anyone noticing. Laura, who was storing up the look of the light on the water, and the sound of the fiddle in the dark, and the exact feeling of standing in front of the candy she could not have. She was gathering, without knowing she was gathering, the raw material of a body of work that did not yet exist and would not exist for another 60 years. And here is the quiet miracle I want you to fall toward as you drift. Everything you have heard tonight, the dugout, the locust, the hunger, the fiddle, the bell, the deep water, the whole hard, beautiful world of Plum Creek, survives at all only because one hungry, restless, ordinary little girl in a one-room school was quietly learning to read and write. The suffering of this family could so easily have vanished the way the suffering of 1,000,000 other frontier families vanished. Unrecorded, unmourned, gone. It did not vanish. It became literature. It became some of the most beloved books America has ever produced. And it all traces back to a slate, and a piece of chalk in a cold one-room schoolhouse, and a girl no one was watching. The most important thing that happened in these years was invisible, and it was happening inside a child's head. Here is where Charles Ingalls made the second great decision of this story, and like the first one, the trading away of the horses, it was a decision made out of hope, and it would tighten around them later like a knot pulled wet. He decided to build a house, not to wait for the harvest, and then build. To build now on credit, against the wheat that was still standing green in the field. He went into the little town, and he bought sawn lumber, real milled boards, and nails, and glass windows, the kind of materials a dugout never needed, and a real house could not do without. He did not have the money for these things, he signed for them. He promised to pay when the wheat came in, because everyone could see the wheat, everyone could see how thick it stood, and a promise against a crop that good was hardly a risk at all. That is what a promise against a good crop feels like. It feels like nothing. It feels like a sum that has already worked out. And he built them a beautiful house. By the standards of that family in that time, it may have been the finest home they had ever had. It stood up in the light in the air above the ground, with wooden walls and real windows that let the sun pour in, and a floor of boards instead of packed earth. After the dim and the damp of the dugout, walking into that new frame house must have felt like walking up out of a grave into the morning. There were windows you could see the prairie through. There was space. There was the smell of fresh-cut pine instead of cold soil. Caroline Ingalls, who had made a home out of a hole in a bank without a word of complaint that Laura ever recorded, now had a house with windows. And I want you to notice what has happened here quietly, underneath the joy of it. 2 hinges have now closed. The horses are gone, so they cannot easily leave. And now the debt is signed, so they cannot afford to fail. Every good and hopeful choice this loving father has made has also, without anyone seeing it, removed one more way out. He has bet the house on the wheat. He has bet the winter on the summer. All of it now rests on one green field standing quietly in the sun, and on the single unspoken assumption underneath every frontier life, the assumption that next year the land will keep its side of the bargain. The wheat ripened. It turned, just as he had promised it would, from green to a heavy pale gold. It grew so well that neighbours remarked on it. Charles Ingalls walked the edge of that field in the last days before the harvest, and he was, we can be fairly sure, as close to a wealthy man as he had ever been in his life, or ever would be. The grain was nearly ready. A few more days of sun, a week perhaps. The debt was about to become nothing. The house was about to become theirs. The winter was about to become safe. He was a week away. I'm going to let you rest for just a moment before I tell you what came over the horizon that afternoon, because you have earned the pause, and because they had no idea it was coming. And for one more breath I would like to let them not know. Close your eyes if they want to close. The wheat is still standing. It is a beautiful afternoon in the summer of 1875 and nothing is wrong yet. Stay there with them a moment. Then come with me. It starts as a strangeness in the light. You're outside that bright afternoon, and you notice that the sun has begun to dim, the way it does when a cloud crosses it. Except there is no cloud, or rather there is, but it is the wrong colour, and it is moving the wrong way, and it is making the wrong sound. Along the far edge of the sky, low over the prairie, there is a shimmer, a glittering haze like heat but silver, and it is coming toward you. And as it comes, the sound arrives ahead of it, a dry whirring hum that you feel in your teeth before you understand it. Then the first of them lands on your arm. It is a grasshopper, long as your finger, with hard folded wings and small clicking legs, and even as you brush it away another strikes your cheek and another catches in your hair, and you look up, and the shimmer on the horizon has become the whole sky, and the whole sky is falling. They come down in the tens of millions. They come down until the light goes brown, until the air itself is made of moving bodies, until you cannot see the sun and you cannot see the field and you can barely see the person standing next to you. They land on the house, and the sound of them is like a hard rain that never stops. They land on the ground until the ground is not ground anymore, but a living, crawling carpet that shifts and glitters and climbs. They land on you, and there is nothing you can do about it, because there are too many. There are always too many. There is no end to them. What descended on the Ingalls family and their neighbours that year was not a storm and not a plague in the small sense. It was one of the largest natural disasters in the recorded history of the North American continent. The creature was the Rocky Mountain locust, and in the 1870s it swarmed out of the west in numbers that are almost impossible to hold in the mind. In its largest flights, that living cloud was later estimated to have covered a stretch of sky in the order of 198,000 square miles. Think of that. Not a field, not a county. A cloud of insects broad enough to shadow an area larger than many entire states, one uncountable body of trillions, blotting the sun over farm after farm across the plains. And they ate. They ate the wheat first, the beautiful, nearly ripe wheat, the wheat that was 1 week from paying for everything. They stripped it to the bare stalk and then they ate the stalk. But they did not stop at the crop. And this is the part that tells you what these people were truly facing. The locusts ate the garden down to the soil. They ate the grass off the prairie. They ate the leaves from the plum thicket by the creek where the girls had played, and then the bark. It was said that they ate the wool off the backs of living sheep and the wooden handles of the tools, that they chewed the clothes a woman was wearing while she tried to beat them off her own garden, that they fouled the creek with their bodies until the water could not be drunk. They gnawed at door frames. They came into the house. For a stunned family standing in the brown, snowing ruin of everything they had planted, there was no fighting it, and no saving any of it. You cannot fight the sky. You can only stand in it and watch a year of your life be eaten in an afternoon. By the time that cloud lifted and moved on, the field that had been gold was black earth and stubble. The wheat was gone, and the wheat was the house, and the wheat was the debt, and the wheat was the coming winter. In the space of a single afternoon, the family that had felt completely safe was ruined. Now remember what I asked you to keep in the back of your mind. The horses are gone, traded away. The debt is signed against a crop that no longer exists. And winter, the real subject of tonight, the winter you were asked whether you could survive, is now only a few months off, and the family will meet it underground, in the dugout, with no wheat, no money, and no way to ride out. This is the moment the ground opened under them. Everything from here on is the falling. Let me not rush you past the day after the swarm, because the moment the locusts lift is its own kind of horror, quieter than the descent but somehow worse, and I want you to stand in it. The sound stops first. For hours the air has been full of that dry, whirring roar, the sound of millions of bodies and millions of tiny jaws, and then, over the space of an afternoon, it thins and lifts and moves on east to fall on some other family's fields, and you're left in a silence that rings. And you walk out into what is left. The wheat is gone, not damaged, gone. Where a golden field stood shoulder high, this morning there is now bare black dirt and a stubble of chewed stalks, as though the land had been shaved. The garden is gone. The grass of the yard is gone. The leaves are gone from the plum thicket, and as you look closer you see the bark is gnawed too. The young branches stripped pale and naked. And everywhere are the locusts that did not leave, the dead and the dying, drifted in the corners, floating in the creek, crushed underfoot with every step so that the ground itself is slick and foul with them, and over all of it hangs a smell, a thick, sweetish, rotting smell of the creatures and their filth. In the water, in the well, in the air, you have to keep breathing. They fouled the water. That is a detail that does not make it into the pretty version, and it should, because it turns a ruined crop into a threat to your life. The locusts died in the creek, and the well in such numbers that the water could sicken you, and water is not optional, and there was no other water, and so on top of everything, a family now had the problem of how to drink, without poisoning their children. They chewed the harnesses and the wooden tool handles for the salt of human sweat soaked into them. It was said in some places that they came at the clothing on people's bodies. This was not a bad harvest. This was a world turned briefly and completely against the people trying to live in it, an afternoon in which the sky, the ground, the water, and the very tools in your hands all became your enemy at once. And I keep returning to one fact, because it is the hinge the whole tragedy swings on. It was ready. The wheat was a week, maybe 2 from the scythe. Charles Ingalls had won. For one afternoon he was a man who had beaten the frontier, whose gamble had paid, whose debt was about to dissolve into gold. And then the sky took it. All of it. In hours. For reasons that had nothing to do with anything he did right or wrong. Sit in that with me before we go into the winter, because that is the emotional weight they carried down into the dark with them. Not just hunger, the particular despair of having been 1 week from safe and watching safe be eaten in front of your eyes. There is one more burden of a dugout winter I have not laid on you yet, and it is a heavy one, and it is the animals. A frontier family did not survive alone. They survived alongside a small circle of animals that were, in the cold reckoning of the plains, both mouths to keep alive and the difference between living and dying. A cow, if they had one, meant milk, meant a thread of nourishment through the winter for the children, and so the cow had to be kept alive, which meant the cow had to be fed and watered and sheltered all winter out of the same thin store that was barely feeding the people. So, add this to your day in the earth. It is the hardest cold of the winter, and before you can properly warm yourself, you must go out, into the wind that takes the breath out of your mouth, to the animals. You break the ice on their water, or you carry water to them from the house. You bring them what fodder there is, measuring it, because it too is running out, because the locusts ate the grass that should have become their winter hay. You put your hands on the animals in the dark and you feel their ribs and you know exactly what that means. And you know that if the fodder runs out before the spring, they die. And if they die, the milk dies with them, and the thin thread of nourishment your children are hanging by parts. You're not just rationing food for people. You're rationing the survival of the creatures the people depend on, and there is no slack anywhere in the whole system. No margin, no spare, nothing between the family and the end but your own 2 hands and your own refusal to let go. This is what I mean when I say you would not last. It is never one thing. It is the fire and the food and the water and the dark and the cold in the floor and the animals and the fodder and the fouled well and the debt and the fear kept off your face for the children, all of it at once, every day, with no day off and no help coming, and no certainty that the spring will arrive before the supplies run out. Any one of these you could perhaps manage. All of them together for months underground is a weight that the modern body and the modern mind, raised in warmth and plenty and safety, simply is not built to carry. They carried it. Let us go down into the heaviest of it now, into the deep of the winter itself, and see how. So now we come to it, the winter, the thing the whole title of tonight is built around, and I want to take you down into it slowly, hour by hour, because the truth of a dugout winter is not in any single dramatic moment. It is in the slow accumulation of small, quiet, unrelenting things, until the weight of all of them together becomes the thing that would break you. Come back down the low doorway. It is dark early now. The beautiful creek is a ribbon of ice. The plum thicket is bare sticks. The prairie that was an ocean of grass is a white blank that goes to the edge of the world in every direction and does not stop. Wake in the dark, and for a moment you do not know if it is morning. There is no way to know. The one small window is banked over with snow, so no light comes through it, and inside the earth there is no dawn. There is only the cold and the sound of the wind going over the grass on the roof above your head, a low steady moaning that has not stopped for 3 days. You lie still under every blanket the family owns, and you can see your own breath rise pale in the black. The fire in the stove has burned down to almost nothing in the night, and the cold has come up through the dirt floor and into the bed, and into your bones, the particular deep cold of the ground, which is not like the cold of the air. The air chills your skin, the ground chills your marrow, You have to get up and build the fire, and building the fire means fuel, and fuel is the first of the quiet problems. There are no forests here. There is almost no wood. Out on the treeless prairie, a family burned whatever it could gather in the short warm months and hoarded against exactly this. And now, in the deep of it, the pile is going down faster than the winter is. On the worst plains winters, families burned twisted hay and slough grass. And when it came to it, the dry dung of cattle, anything that would take a flame and hold it for a little while, because the alternative to a fire was not discomfort. The alternative to a fire was death, quietly, in your sleep, in the dark, under the ground. You feed the stove and you watch the small flame, and you do the counting that every person in that dugout was doing all winter without ever saying it out loud. How much fuel is left? How much food is left? How many weeks of winter are left? And whether the first two will last as long as the third. And the food. Let me put you in front of it. There is no store you can reach through the snow. There is no crop because you watch the crop eaten out of the sky. There is only what was put by, what was dried and salted and stored in the warm months against the cold ones, and it is a smaller pile than you would like, and it does not grow, it only ever shrinks, so the meals get smaller. Not suddenly, slowly, the way everything down here happens slowly. A little less on the plate, the same thing again, and then again, until eating is not a pleasure but a chore performed against hunger. And through it all, the mother of that family, Caroline Ingalls, had to divide too little food among children she loved and keep her face calm while she did it, so that the children would not learn to be afraid. Laura, remembering these years as a grown woman, would fold the fear away and write around it. But it was there. You cannot ration a family through a prairie winter and not know fear. You simply do not let the children see it. This is the answer, by the way, to the question I asked you at the very start. Could you last one winter down here? Most people today, dropped into that dugout in December, would not last because of any single catastrophe. They would come apart in the sheer grind of it, the dark that never lifts, the cold that lives in the floor, the food that only shrinks, the days you cannot tell apart. The walls of earth are hands' width from your face when you sleep. No screen, no voice, no light, no news of the world, no certainty that spring is truly coming, only the wind on the roof and the count that never comes out comfortably. That is what would break you, not a moment, the accumulation. And if it is working on you a little even now, if the low sound of that buried winter is pulling your own eyes closed, then let them close. You are exactly where I hoped you would be. You do not have to reach the end of this wake. The family is warm enough tonight. The fire is holding. Rest, and I will keep watch over the story while you do. I have said the food only ever shrank. Let me stay with that longer, because hunger is not one feeling. It is a long, slow country you travel through, and the family lived in it for a long time, and I want you to understand the shape of it. At first, when the stores run low, it is only a smaller plate, and a smaller plate is nothing, a mild disappointment, the sort of thing you can ignore with a little discipline. But hunger is patient, day after day of the smaller plate, and the disappointment stops being mild. It becomes a quiet ache that is with you when you wake, and with you when you work, and with you when you try to sleep. A low, constant hollowness that you learn to live around the way you learn to live around a bad tooth. The food that there is becomes plainer and plainer. The same coarse bread, the same thin mush of ground corn, day upon day upon day, until eating is no longer a pleasure at all, but only a small, dull medicine you take against the ache. Never quite enough of it, never quite filling the hollow. And the worst of it, in a family, is not your own hunger. You could bear your own. The worst of it is the children. A child does not understand rationing. A child only understands that it is hungry, and that there was more yesterday, and that the grown-ups who can fix everything are somehow not fixing this. And so the hardest work of the hungry season falls on the mother, who must divide too little among too many, who must give the children the larger share and take the smaller herself and never let it show, who must answer the small voice that asks if there is more with a calm no that costs her more than the child will ever know. There is a particular exhaustion in being hungry while pretending, for the sake of the little ones, that you are not, and Caroline Ingalls lived in that exhaustion for months at a time and left, as always, almost no record of it, because complaint was a luxury and she did not permit herself luxuries. And after the locusts, in the leanest stretch, it went beyond thin plates. There were times, on the plains in those ruined years, when families lived on almost nothing, on bread and little else, on whatever could be stretched and eked and made to last, watching the flour barrel go down and doing the terrible sum of how many days of bread remained against how many days of winter. People did not always starve outright, but they went hungry in a deep, grinding, long-term way that damaged children as they grew and wore adults down to the bone, and they did it quietly, in their holes in the ground, out of sight of a country that liked to imagine the frontier as an adventure. It was not an adventure. On the worst days it was the simple animal question of whether there would be enough, and the answer for a frightening while was not certain. So, when I ask whether you could last one winter here, add this to the ledger: not just cold, hunger, the long kind. The kind that does not kill you quickly enough to be dramatic, but sits with you for months and hollows you out and tests, more than almost anything else, your ability to stay gentle, to stay hopeful, to keep dividing the little there is without bitterness. They passed that test. Night after hungry night, they passed it. Rest now, warm and fed, and let them rest too. Let me stay a while longer in the deep of the winter, because there is a particular thing the earth does to a person that I have only touched on, and it deserves its own quiet hour, and it is the strangest of all the hardships, because it is the one that happens inside your mind. Down here you begin to lose time. Above ground, even in the worst winter, the day has a shape. The light comes and moves across the sky and goes, and you feel the hours pass in your body because you can see them pass. But in the dugout, with the one small window banked over in snow and the door shut against the killing cold, there is no such shape. You wake, and you do not know the hour. You cannot tell early from late, morning from afternoon, except by the burning down of a candle you're trying not to burn, or the deep animal sense of your own hunger. The days stop being days. They become a single long dim sameness, lit by firelight, measured only by small chores and smaller meals, and one blends into the next, and you realise with a small cold shock that you're not entirely sure how many days the last storm lasted, whether it was 2 or 3 or 4, because down here in the earth there was no way to keep the count, and no reason the count would hold, and the sameness works on you. Human beings are not built for this, for the featureless dim, for the absence of sky, for days with no edges. It is the thing that modern people, dropped into that room, would feel breaking them first and understand last, because it does not announce itself. It is not dramatic like hunger or sharp like cold. It is a slow dissolving of the ordinary structure that holds a mind steady, the rhythm of light and dark, of going out and coming in, of time moving in a straight and countable line. Take that away, bury it under a foot of sod, and a person begins quietly to come loose from the world. The frontier families who lived through dugout winters did not have a word for this, but they knew it. The strange, floating heaviness of the deep winter underground, the way the mind slowed and thinned and turned inward, the way the self seemed to shrink to the size of the firelit room and the small warm bodies inside it. And so, when I ask whether you could last one winter down here, understand that I am not only asking whether your body could take the cold and the hunger, I am asking whether your mind could take the dark and the sameness and the loss of time, the long featureless dissolving of the days with no screen to look at, no voice from far away, no proof arriving from outside that the world still exists and the spring is still coming. That is the deepest test of the dugout, not the cold in the floor, the quiet in the mind. And the fact that they came up out of it, month after month, still themselves, still steady, still able to play a fiddle and keep a Christmas, and teach a child her letters, is the truest measure of how strong these ordinary people actually were. Rest now and let the dim take you gently, the way it took them. You are only visiting. You get to come back up. Before the music, before we let the good night come, I want to give you a single ordinary day of labour inside that dugout. The labour that no one wrote a book about. The labour that was simply expected and so simply vanished from the story. I want to give you Caroline Ingalls Day, because the men in these tales walk and plough and fail and are remembered, and the women hold the entire inside of survival together, and are called, if they are called anything, simply Ma. You are the mother now, and your day begins before anyone else's, in the dark, because the fire has gone down in the night, and a cold home is a dangerous home. So, you're the first up onto the cold floor, the first to wake the coals and feed them and coax the warmth back into the room before the children have to leave their blankets. Then the water. There is no tap. Water comes from the creek, and the creek is down the bank, and you carry it up, bucket by heavy bucket, your arms and your back doing the work that in your great-granddaughter's house a pipe will do without a thought. Every drop that family drinks, cooks with, washes in, you carry up that bank on your own two arms, all day, every day, in every weather. Then you cook, over an open flame, in heavy iron, in a room the size of a pantry, food that must stretch, food you must make taste like enough when it is not quite enough, and you must do it without ever letting the children see you counting. And you clean, and here is a thing to sit with. You keep house on a floor made of dirt. The floor is packed earth, and you sweep it, and you keep it swept hard and clean, and you fight every single day the simple, relentless fact that you're living inside the ground, and the ground is always trying to get into the food and the beds and the clothes and the children, and the washing. On wash day you haul the water and you heat it, and you scrub each garment by hand against a board until your knuckles are raw, and you wring it out by main strength, and you hang it to dry, and there is no small load, because there is a family, and it must all be done again next week and the week after forever. And through all of it, Caroline Ingalls held a standard that tells you everything about her. She insisted, in a hole in a creek bank, on the far edge of nothing, that her daughters be clean and mannered and educated and good. She would not let the hardness of the place make her children hard or wild or ignorant. She taught them their letters and their manners and their Sunday lessons. She kept their faces washed and their hair braided. She held the line of civilization inside that dugout with nothing but her own will, and she held it not because anyone was watching, because no one was watching, but because she had decided that being poor and being underground were not the same as giving up, and her children would know the difference. That decision, made daily, invisibly, for years, is one of the quiet, heroic acts of this whole story, and it is exactly the kind of act that history forgets, because it made no noise and left no ruin, and simply produced at the end 3 good women and a set of books that changed the world. I say this especially to those of you listening tonight who have done this work, or watched your mother or your grandmother do it. The endless, invisible labour of holding a home together that only gets noticed on the rare day it is not done. You know this woman. You have been this woman, or you were raised by her. Caroline Ingalls is every one of them, and tonight, in this small way, in the dark, her work gets said out loud. Let that be a comfort as you rest. The quiet work counts. It always counted. History just forgot to write it down, and tonight, for a few minutes, we did not. I have shown you the cold and the dark and the shrinking food, and all of that is true, and you might reasonably ask how anyone kept their spirit alive down there through months of it. And the answer, in this family, has a name, and the name is the fiddle. Charles Ingalls carried a fiddle across every mile of every move of his whole restless life, and he could play it, truly play it, and in the memory of his daughter that fiddle is almost a member of the family. On the long winter evenings, when the day's work was done and the supper, such as it was, had been eaten, and the dark had closed the dugout down to the small circle of the firelight, Charles would take the fiddle down and tune it and begin to play. So let me give you one of the good nights, because they had good nights too, and the good nights are the reason they survived the bad ones. You are lying in the warm dark of the dugout. Outside, above the grass on the roof, the winter is doing what the winter does. The wind is dragging itself across the prairie. The cold is pressing its hand against the whole world. But in here there is a fire, low and orange, and there is your mother's face soft in the light of it. And there is your father with the fiddle tucked under his chin, and the bow comes down across the strings and the music rises up and fills the little earthen room and pushes the winter back out to the edges where it belongs. He plays the old tunes, the reels and the hymns and the songs everyone knows, and sometimes the family sings, their voices small and warm under the huge indifferent sky they cannot see. And for the length of a song, the dugout is not a hole in the ground where a poor family is waiting out a killing winter. It is a home. It is the safest and best place in the whole world. That is what the music did. It did not change a single hard fact. It changed what the hard facts felt like, which, when you cannot change the facts, is the only mercy there is. I want you to understand that this was not a small thing, or a sentimental thing. This was survival equipment, as real as the fire and the stored food. A family can endure almost unbelievable hardship if the hardship happens inside a place that still feels like love. And a family can be broken by far less if the love goes cold. Charles Ingalls, who failed at so many practical things, who could not beat the locusts or the debt or the land, did not fail at this, at keeping the inside of that family warm while the outside froze. The fiddle is why the children remembered the dugout years, against all reason, as years worth remembering. Hold that sound in your mind, the fiddle in the dark under the grass as you drift. It is one of the truest things in this whole story, and since we are in the deep of a dugout winter, let me give you a single day out of it. The one day that shines, because how a poor family kept Christmas in a hole in the ground tells you more about them than 100 pages of hardship. Understand first what you do not have. You do not have a store full of gifts a short drive away. You do not have money to spend even if you did. You do not have a tree strung with lights, or a pile of wrapped boxes, or any of the enormous warm abundance that the word Christmas now calls up in you. You have a dugout, and a winter, and very little, and children who are still children, who still wake on that morning with the old wild hope in them that today, something wonderful might happen. And the parents know exactly how little they have to make that hope come true. And here is the thing that will stay with you. It was enough. A Christmas in that world might mean a stick of peppermint candy, a single stick striped red and white, more precious than any expensive thing you have ever been given, because it was sweetness in a life that had almost none, and because it was rare, and because someone who had almost nothing had gone without something themselves to get it for you. It might mean a small tin cup of your very own, so that you did not have to share, and a tin cup could be a treasure. It might mean a penny, an actual copper penny, held in a child's palm like a coin of gold. It might mean a little cake made from flour and sugar hoarded and hidden for weeks for exactly this. That was Christmas. A candy stick, a cup, a penny, a taste of cake, and the fiddle, and the whole family together in the firelit dark. And the children were, by every account, wildly, genuinely happy. Happier over a stick of candy than a modern child over a mountain of gifts, because happiness was never about the size of the thing. It was about the meaning of it, and the meaning was enormous. I put this day in front of you for a reason, and it is not only to warm you before you sleep, though I hope it does. It is because this is the answer to a question you might not have known you were carrying. How did children remember the hungriest, hardest years of their lives as happy? This is how. Because their parents, with almost nothing, kept building small islands of wonder in the middle of the hardship. A stick of candy, a fiddle tune, a story, a warm circle of light, and the children stood on those islands and did not see the cold water all around them, because the grown-ups were standing in the cold water so that the children would not have to. That is what those parents were doing down there in the dark. That is what parents like them have always done. And it worked. The proof that it worked is that the little girl grew up and wrote the whole thing down as a story about happiness. Let that be the warm thing you carry down into sleep. Before he walks away east on his ruined feet, let me stop and show you the man himself, Charles Ingalls, because everything he did in this story flows from who he was, and who he was is more complicated and more human than the gentle par of the television screen. Charles Ingalls had, in the language of his own time, an itching foot. He could not stay put. Across his life he moved his family again and again and again, from Wisconsin to Kansas to Minnesota to Iowa and back, and finally to Dakota, always pulling up roots just as they began to hold, always sure that the next place, the place just over the horizon, would be the one where it all came right. He was a skilled man, genuinely skilled, a carpenter who could raise a house, a hunter who could feed a family, a fiddler who could lift a room, a man of real competence and real warmth whose daughters adored him, and whose warmth comes down to us across a century and a half undimmed. But that same restless hope that made him wonderful also made him dangerous to the people he loved. It was the hope that traded the horses for the dugout. It was hope that signed for the lumber against a crop still standing green. It was hope that planted a second time into ground he had already watched betray him. Charles Ingalls believed, against all the evidence his own hard life kept handing him, that the land would keep its promises, that next year would be the good year, that if he just worked hard enough and moved far enough, the frontier would finally pay out. It never quite did. He chased that horizon his whole life, and he never once caught it, and his family paid the price of the chase in dugouts and hunger and a lost baby son. And here is the thing that is not simple. Was he a failure? By the flat measure of money and land in these years, yes, he failed. Over and over. And yet the children he raised in those failing years grew up steady and loving and strong, and one of them wrote books that have comforted the whole world. And the reason they could remember the hardest years as happy is precisely that their father never stopped believing that good things were coming, never let the family's spirit go as cold as its circumstances. His hope doomed them, and his hope saved them, and you cannot keep one without the other. That is a real man, not a cartoon. Keep him in your mind, this hopeful, restless, loving, dangerous, wonderful father, as he laces grass into his broken boots and sets out east to save the family his own hope helped put in danger. Now I have to tell you about a decision that, when you first hear it, sounds almost impossible, and then, when you understand the trap they were in, becomes almost unbearably brave. After the locusts took the wheat, the Ingalls family had no money and assigned debt, and a winter to survive, and no way to earn a single dollar from land that would no longer grow anything. And so, Charles Ingalls did the only thing left to a man in that position. He left. He set out east on foot across hundreds of miles of country to find work in the wheat harvests of places the locusts had not destroyed, so that he could earn the money to keep his family alive and hold on to their claim, understand what that meant physically. This was not a journey by horse, because you remember, the horses were gone, traded away in the very first days for the roof over their heads. He walked. By the accounts that come down to us, Charles Ingalls walked something on the order of 200 miles to reach work, and he did it with his boots wearing through, and there is a detail that has survived the years because it is the kind of detail you do not forget, that by the end of that walk the soles of his feet were bruised and swollen and bleeding, and he lined his worn-out boots with grass and kept walking, because stopping was not one of the choices available to him, and while he walked he left his family behind in the earth. So now the dugout is emptier, and the winter is the same, and you are Carolyn Ingalls. You are a young mother, alone, at the bottom of a hole in a creek bank, on an empty white prairie with small children and a shrinking store of food, and a husband who is somewhere out past the edge of the visible world, walking, and you do not know if he is alive today, and there is no way to find out, no way to send a word or receive one. You keep the fire, you divide the food, you answer the children when they ask when Pa is coming home, and you keep your voice even, and you do not tell them the true answer, which is that you do not know, that no one knows, that you're holding this family together by will alone in a hole in the ground, and hoping the man you love is doing the same thing somewhere out in the cold. We do not have Carolyn Ingalls' own words for those weeks, because she was not a woman who left many words behind, and that silence is itself part of the story. The frontier ran on the uncomplaining endurance of women whose names history barely recorded, women who held the inside of survival together while the outside of it got written down. Charles walked, and that is remembered. Carolyn waited and rationed and kept 3 children calm and fed and warm enough through a winter in a dugout with no help within reach, and that was simply expected. and so it went mostly unwritten. But I want it written here, tonight. What she did in that dark was not less than what he did on that road. It was only quieter, and the quiet is exactly why you have never heard it. Keep her in your mind as we go on, that young woman keeping watch in the earth. Because the family did survive that stretch. Charles found the work and earned what he could, and eventually came back to them out of the white distance, feet ruined, alive. They had made it through. And if the story ended there, it would be hard, but it would end in triumph. It does not end there. There was a second year coming, and the second year is where hope, the thing that had carried them through everything so far, finally ran out. Here is the cruelty that the land had kept in reserve, and it is a piece of cold biology that the family could not have known and could not have fought. When the great swarm of locusts had come down and eaten everything in 1875, it did not simply eat and move on. Before it left, it laid its eggs. The female locusts drove their egg cases down into the soil of the prairie, into that same rich black soil Charles had broken and planted, and they left them there, in their millions upon millions, packed into the ground, waiting through the frozen winter for the warmth to come back. So, think about what that means for a family holding on by their fingernails. They survived the first ruin. Charles walked his 200 miles and bled through his boots and earned enough to carry them. Caroline held the dugout through the winter. Spring came, and with the spring, Charles Ingalls did the bravest and most heartbreaking thing in this whole story, which was to try again. He planted again. He put seed into the ground one more time and let himself hope one more time, because what else can a farmer do? What else is there but to plant and to hope? And then the warmth comes back into the soil, and the ground itself begins to move. You're standing in the new field, the young green just coming up, and you see the earth at your feet stir and glitter and then break open as the eggs that were waiting all winter hatch all at once, in numbers past counting, and a new generation of locusts comes up out of the very ground you planted, hungry, into the very crop you planted, and begins to eat it from below, even as the last of the great swarms drift back overhead to finish it from above. The disaster is not coming from the sky this time. It is coming up out of your own field. The land you bet everything on is giving birth to the thing that is destroying you. This second crop was lost the way the first had been lost, and something in the family broke that could not be mended by courage, because it was not a lack of courage that had failed them. They had not been lazy. They had not been foolish. Charles Ingalls had worked as hard as a human being can work, had walked until he bled, had planted and replanted, had done everything right, and the land had answered him twice with ruin. There is a particular kind of grief in that, the grief of having done everything correctly and lost anyway, and it is heavier than the grief of a mistake, because there is nothing to fix, no lesson that would have saved you, only the flat fact that you were not strong enough to beat a thing that no one could have beaten. And so the decision that had been unthinkable became the only decision left. They would give up. They would let go of the claim and the beautiful house built on the promise of the wheat, and the creek where the girls had waded, and the dugout in the bank, and the whole bright dream that had brought them to Plum Creek full of hope 2 years before. They would leave. But before they could leave, this family that had already lost so much was going to be asked to lose the one thing that makes all the other losses survivable. And that is the part of the story the books could never bring themselves to tell you plainly. That is where we go next. I'm going to tell this part gently, because it is the tenderest thing in the whole story, and because the family carried it quietly for the rest of their lives, and quiet is the right way to hold it. Somewhere in the middle of these hard years on Plum Creek, in the autumn after the first ruin, a fourth child was born to Charles and Caroline Ingalls, a son. They named him Charles Frederick after his father, and in the family he was called Freddie. After 3 daughters, Mary and Laura and Carrie, here at last was a boy, born into the worst season of his parents' lives, into the dugout years, into hunger and debt and locusts. And yet he was, by the simple fact of being a new baby, a a small warm reason to keep going. You can hold a family together on very little. Sometimes a family holds itself together on the weight of a single new life that needs it. Freddie did not live to be 1 year old. He was born in the November, and he died the following August at about 9 months of age, as the family was already on the move, already in the process of giving up Plum Creek and searching for somewhere the land had not turned against them. He sickened, the way infants sickened so easily and so quickly in that century, when a fever could take a strong baby in a matter of days, and there was no medicine that could reliably stop it, and often no doctor within reach at all. And on a late summer day, on the road, away from the dugout and the creek, and the only home he had ever known, the only son of Charles and Carolyn Ingalls died. There is no grand marker for Freddie Ingalls. The exact place he was laid to rest is not certainly known today. He is the child the famous books left almost entirely out, the brother Laura barely mentioned, the small life that slipped through the seam between the hard years and was carried silently by the people who loved him for the rest of their own long lives. Caroline Ingalls would go on to endure more than most of us will ever be asked to endure, and she would do it, as she did everything, without a public word. But a mother does not forget the weight of a 9-month-old son. She only learns to carry it where it does not show. I tell you this not to sadden you as you fall asleep, but because it is the true answer to a question the cheerful version of this story never lets you ask. When we say a pioneer family survived, we say it as if survival were the same as coming through whole. It was not. They survived Plum Creek, and they left a son behind in the ground of it. That is what survival cost out there, more often than the books could bear to say. Hold him gently in your mind for a moment. Then let us walk with the family down the last of this road. So here you are at the end of it. 2 years ago, you came to this creek full of hope, with horses and a dream and a field of imaginary gold. Now you stand at the top of the bank in the thin light of a morning you have been dreading, and you look down one last time at the dugout, at the low door in the grassy hillside, at the roof you can barely tell from the prairie around it, and you understand that you are about to walk away from it and never come back. You look at the frame house, the beautiful house with the real windows, the house built on the promise of a crop that was eaten twice. It is not yours anymore. The debt swallowed it. You look at the creek where your daughters waded in the first bright summer, at the flat grey rock where they played, at the bare place where the plum thicket blossomed and then was stripped to sticks. You are leaving all of it. And you are leaving it as a poorer family than the one that arrived, with a son buried behind you, and nothing ahead but the hope, worn thin now but not quite gone, that somewhere else the ground will be kinder. The Ingalls family gave up their claim on Plum Creek and left in the year 1876. And here is the thing I most want you to carry out of tonight, the thing that turns this from a sad story into something else. They kept going, where they went, and what it cost them, and how, impossibly, all of this hardship was one day turned into a gift for the whole world, is the last of what I have to tell you. But not yet. First, there is one more thing I promised you, out at the very start about the thing that came down out of the sky, and it is stranger than anything else in this story. Now I want to take you up out of the dugout for a while, up off the creek bank and out over the whole plains, because the thing that destroyed the Ingalls family was not only their private catastrophe, it was one of the strangest and largest events in the natural history of this continent, and its ending is so surprising that it has kept scientists arguing for more than 100 years. If you're still with me, drifting at the edge of sleep, this is a good place to float for a while. The creature was the Rocky Mountain locust, and in the 1870s it produced what may have been the single greatest gathering of animals ever recorded on Earth. In the summer of 1875, the same year the Ingalls wheat was eaten, a naturalist tried to measure one of these swarms as it passed. He tracked its width and its speed, and the time it took to cross, and when he finished the sum he arrived at a number that sounds like a misprint. That one swarm, he estimated, covered something close to 198,000 square miles of sky, and contained, by a careful guess, in the order of 12.5 trillion insects. Trillion. It has been called the greatest concentration of living creatures ever known, before or since, and the Ingalls family stood underneath it with a rake and a bedsheet trying to save a garden. Sit with the scale of that for a moment as you lie there in the dark. Every hard thing that happened to this family, The ruined wheat, the walked road and the bleeding feet, the hungry winter in the earth, the giving up. Even in some long chain of consequence, the leaving on the road where the baby died, all of it traces back to an event so vast that it is to this day one of the largest biological gatherings human beings have ever witnessed. They did not fail against an ordinary hardship. They stood in the path of something close to the upper limit of what nature can throw at a person. No wonder the wheat did not stand a chance. No wonder they did not. And now here is the part that almost no one knows. The part that I promised the scale of this thing had been kept in reserve for. That creature, the Rocky Mountain locust, the insect that could darken the sky over an area larger than many nations, the most numerous animal this continent may have ever produced, is gone, not reduced, not endangered, gone, extinct. Within roughly a single human generation of the swarms that ate the Ingalls wheat, the Rocky Mountain locust vanished from the earth entirely. By around the year 1902, the last living specimens were collected, and after that, nothing. A creature that had existed in the trillions, that had shaped the fate of thousands of families across the plains, simply stopped being, and no one is completely certain why to this day. The leading explanation is quietly astonishing, and I will leave it with you as the sort of thing that turns over slowly in the mind as you fall asleep. The locust, for all its unimaginable numbers in the swarm years, seems to have depended on breeding grounds in a relatively small set of river valleys and fertile soils in the mountain west. And in exactly those years, settlers, farmers, families very much like the Ingalls, moved into those same valleys and began to plough them, and to plant them, and to graze cattle over them, and in doing so, without ever intending to, without ever knowing they were doing it, they destroyed the hidden cradle where the next trillions were quietly waiting to be born. The very people the locust ruined may have been, in the end, the reason the locust ceased to exist at all. There is a strange and enormous justice in that, and also a strange and enormous sadness, and I do not think either one cancels the other. The thing that ate their world is now more thoroughly gone from the world than they are, because Laura at least lives on in every reader, and the locust lives on only in glass drawers in a few museums and in the memory of the ruin it caused. Let it turn over in you. The sky that came down on Plum Creek can never come down again. It ate itself out of existence, and the little girl who watched it come is still, in a sense, here, telling you about it through me tonight. Let me bring you back down now, off the great scale of the sky and the vanished swarms, back to the small human size of a life lived beside a creek. Because in between the disasters there were ordinary days, and the ordinary days are where a family actually lives, and I do not want to leave you with only the catastrophe. Laura did not remember only the catastrophe. She remembered the water most of all. The creek was the centre of everything. In the warm months it gave them nearly all the good things they had. It gave them water to drink and water to wash in, and a cool place to stand on a burning afternoon. It ran clear over a bed of stones, and the children learned its every bend and pool the way you once learned every corner of the place you grew up. There was a great flat rock, a wide grey table of stone at the water's edge, and the girls would play on it for whole afternoons, and it held the day's heat so that, even in the evening, it was warm under their bare feet. And the creek held small strangenesses that a modern child would shriek at and a frontier child simply learned. There were bloodsuckers in the still shallows, dark, soft leeches that would fasten to your legs when you waded, and you learned to check for them and to take them off, and it was not a horror, it was only Tuesday. There were fish to be caught. There were birds in the reeds. Once, in Laura's remembering, there was even the low-striped shape of a badger, one of the few wild neighbours of the creek bank, a reminder that the family shared this small green world with things that had been here long before them. Now, let me tell you about the roof, because there is one moment that captures better than any other the strange truth of living under the ground. The roof of your home, remember, is sod. It is grass and earth held up on willow branches, and it is level with the prairie, and the grass grows on it the same as the grass grows everywhere else, so that a cow wandering the bank cannot tell your roof from the ground. You're inside one day, in the dim earth light, and above you, through the woven willow and the packed sod, you hear the heavy tread of cattle grazing across the top of your house. And then, in Laura's telling, one day the impossible small disaster happens. An ox, walking over the roof, puts its foot straight through it. A leg comes down through your ceiling, through the grass and the willow, into the room, kicking in the dim air above the table, while the family stares up at a cow's leg dangling out of their own roof. It is almost funny. It is almost a comedy. And it is also the whole thing in a single image, is it not? You are living in a hole so completely a part of the earth that the livestock cannot find the edge of your home, and the sky can, at any moment, put a hoof through your ceiling. And then, against all of this hardness, there is the bell. This is the detail I have been saving because it tells you who Charles Ingalls was underneath all the failure and the striving, and because it is the kind of small true thing that stays with a person. In the little settlement, the people were trying to build a church, and they were poor, all of them, and they were trying to gather enough money for a bell to hang in it, a bell to call them together across the empty prairie on a Sunday morning. And Charles Ingalls, who had almost nothing, who was in debt, who needed a new pair of boots badly enough that he had saved, coin by hard coin, the small sum it would take to buy them, took that money, the boot money, the money for the shoes on his own feet, and he gave it to the church bell instead. Think about what that tells you. This is a man who had been beaten by the locusts and the debt and the land, a man whose own children were going hungry, and when the moment came he gave away the little he had put aside for himself so that the whole community could have a bell to gather under. That is not the act of a defeated man. That is the act of a man who had decided that even out here, even after everything, he would live as though beauty and community and a bell ringing over the snow were worth more than dry feet. The wheat failed him. The land failed him. But the record of who he chose to be did not fail, and it comes down to us across 150 years, in the shape of a bell he could not really afford given by a man who needed the money for his own boots. I told you they kept going. Let me show you what keeping going actually cost, because the road out of Plum Creek did not lead straight to comfort. It led first downward. When the family left the dugout and the ruined claim behind, they went east to a town in Iowa called Burr Oak, and there they took work running a hotel. Picture the change. This was a family that had lived for years alone under the open sky, their own masters on their own land, poor but free. Now they lived in a few rooms of a hotel that sat above a saloon, in a noisy little town working for other people's comfort, listening through the floor to the drinking and the shouting of strangers below. For a proud, independent man like Charles Ingalls, and for Caroline, who had kept her daughters clean and mannered through everything, this was its own quiet humiliation. A different kind of hard than the dugout, the hard of having come down in the world, of trading freedom for a roof and a wage. And yet, even here, at the low point, life did the thing life does. In Burr Oak, a new baby was born to Caroline Ingalls, another daughter, and they named her Grace. Think of what that meant to a mother who had, only months before, buried a son on the road. Here, above a tavern, in the middle of the family's poorest season, a new small warm life arrived to be loved. The grief and the gift did not cancel. They simply sat side by side in the same tired heart, the way they so often do in a real life. The lost boy and the new girl, held together, both true at once. The family did not stay down. After a time they turned back west again, back to the country near Walnut Grove, drawn once more toward the open land that had hurt them, because Charles Ingalls was not built for a town. And then, in the year 1879, they made the last great move of the story you half know, out to the Dakota Territory, to a raw new settlement called De Smet, where the railroad was pushing west into empty grass. It was there, on that final frontier, that the family finally found ground that held them. It was there that the later books are set. It was there that Laura, still a teenager, would meet a quiet young farmer with fast horses named Almonzo Wilder. It was there that the girls would finish growing up. But Dakota asked its own terrible price first, and I will not hide it from you because you have come this far in the truth. Around this time, the eldest daughter, Mary, the gentle scholar, the good student who had loved her slate and her lessons, fell gravely ill. A fever took her down and would not let her go, and when at last it broke and she rose from the bed, she had lost her sight. Mary Ingalls went blind at the very start of her adult life, and she would live the rest of her long years in darkness. The exact illness has been argued over ever since, and the old family belief that it was scarlet fever has been questioned by modern doctors who suspect it may have been something else, some viral inflammation of the brain. But the cause hardly mattered to a family standing at the bedside. What mattered was that their bright, careful Mary would never see again. I tell you this so you understand what the word survival really held for these people. They survived Plum Creek. And on the far side of it waited Bur Oak and the lost boy and Mary's darkness and more winters and more loss. One thing after another, the way it comes in a real life lived close to the edge. And still, through every bit of it, this family held together and kept their love intact and raised, out of all that hardship, daughters who grew into steady, decent, remarkable women, to be broken by the world again and again, and to refuse, every single time, to let it make you cruel or cold, is one of the quietly astonishing things a human family can do. Hold that as we come, at last, back to the creek, and to the end. There is one more turn in this story, and it is the strangest and least known of all, and it reaches all the way from that dugout on the creek into the books that may be sitting on a shelf in your own house tonight. Laura Ingalls grew up and married her quiet farmer, Almanzo Wilder, and had a daughter of her own and named her Rose. And the hard luck that had followed Laura's parents followed Laura too for many years. Poverty and failed crops and a house lost to fire, and a baby son of her own who died in infancy, the pattern repeating down the generations. But Laura and Almanzo held on, out on a farm in the Missouri Ozarks, and slowly built a life. And Laura began in middle age to write, a little for farm newspapers, quiet columns about country living. And her daughter Rose became something Laura never was. Rose Wilder Lane went out into the world and became a professional writer, a real one, a famous and highly paid magazine journalist and author, one of the best-known writers in America in her day. And when Laura, in her 60s, finally sat down to write the story of her childhood, the whole story you've heard tonight, the dugout and the locusts and the long winters, she did not do it entirely alone. She sent her handwritten pages to her professional daughter, and Rose worked on them. How much Rose worked on them is one of the quiet literary arguments that has never fully been settled, because here is the debated truth, and I will give it to you straight, the way the honest scholars give it. Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote those books. The memories were hers, the voice was hers, the life was hers, but her daughter Rose, the seasoned professional, edited them, shaped them, cut and rearranged and polished them. And some scholars have argued that Rose did so much of this work that she was very nearly a hidden co-author, that the beloved little house books as you know them are the product of two women, the mother who lived the story and remembered it, and the daughter who knew how to turn a life into literature. Others say that goes too far, that Laura was always the true author and Rose the gifted editor. The exact line between them is blurred forever, because it happened privately, between a mother and a daughter, in letters and manuscripts passed back and forth across the years. But think about the shape of it, because it is beautiful. The little girl who nearly drowned in the creek, who went hungry in the dugout, who was quietly learning her letters at a cold school while no one watched, grew up and reached back across 60 years, and, with the help of the daughter she raised, turned the worst years of her family's life into a gift for the whole world. The suffering did not vanish. It was not wasted. It was carried all the way from that hole in the ground by a mother and then by her daughter, and shaped and given away and it is still being given tonight to you in the dark as you fall asleep. The dugout collapsed, the wheat was eaten, the locust is extinct, and the story got out anyway, carried in the memory of a girl and finished by the hands of a child. Almost nothing survives the plains. This did. So, what happened, in the end, to that little girl who waded in the creek? Let me close the circle for you softly, because you have come a long way down into the earth with me tonight, and you deserve to be brought back up gently. Laura, the wild one, the one who could not stay away from the deep water, would live an extraordinarily long life. She was born in a log cabin in 1867, in a world of oxen and candlelight and open, unfenced prairie, a world with no electric light and no engine, and no voice that could travel faster than a horse, and she would live to see automobiles and electric light and radios and airplanes and the telephone and the better part of 2 world wars. She did not die until the year 1957, at the age of 90. Think about that span for a moment as you drift. The same person who went hungry in a sod dugout on Plum Creek lived long enough to hear an airplane cross the sky over her farm. The little girl from the hole in the ground lived very nearly into the modern world you yourself were born into. As for the dugout itself, the actual hole in the actual bank, the earth did what earth does. A dugout is not built to last. It is grass and soil and willow, and once no one is there to keep it up, the prairie simply takes it back. The roof that an ox once put its foot through eventually sagged and fell in, and the walls softened and slumped, and the creek bank slowly closed the small wound that people had once cut into it to live inside. And so, if you go there today to the banks of Plum Creek near Walnut Grove, where families still come from all over the world to stand in this story, there is no dugout waiting for you. There is only a shallow, grassy depression in the ground beside the creek, a dip, a soft green hollow where the roof came down and the earth folded back over the room. You can stand at the edge of it, in the sun, with the creek still running clear over its stones exactly the way it ran for Laura, and you can look down into that quiet dent in the prairie and understand that this unremarkable low place in the grass that you might walk right past, is where a family lived 2 of the hardest winters of their lives, where a mother rationed food in the dark, where a father dreamed over a field of wheat, where children waded and went hungry and were, in their way, happy. It is all still there, and none of it is there, only the shape of it kept by the ground. Now let me answer at last the question I asked you at the very beginning, the one I asked you to carry the whole way down. Could you have lasted 1 winter in that dugout? And I think, having stood inside it with me, you already know the honest answer, and the honest answer is almost certainly no. Not because you are weak, because almost no one raised in the warm and lighted world could. You would not last because of the cold that lives in the floor and never leaves. You would not last because of the dark that has no dawn in it. You would not last because of the food that only ever shrinks, and the fuel that only ever burns down, and the walls of earth a hand's width from your face, and the wind on the roof that does not stop for days, and the slow, terrible sum that never once comes out in your favour. You would not last the accumulation. Almost none of us would. But they did. That is the thing to fall asleep holding tonight. Not that the dugout was unsurvivable, but that a real family with real children, with a father who gave his boot money to a belle and a mother who kept her fear off her face, went down into the ground and endured a thing you and I could not endure, and came up out of it and kept walking and lost what they lost and carried it quietly and turned even the worst of it, in the end, into something that would comfort strangers 150 years later, including, tonight, you. So let the rest of your body go heavy now. There is nothing left in this story that needs you awake for it. The wheat is long since eaten, and the sky that ate it is gone from the earth forever, and the little girl who watched it fall grew old and safe and loved and told us everything. The creek is still running, the hollow in the grass is quiet, the family is together and warm enough and at rest. And so can you be. Sleep well. If it helped you rest, you can let me know in the comments where, in the world you're listening from and what the hour is where you are. Because there is a quiet comfort in knowing who else is drifting off out there in the dark alongside you. And if you would like another slow, true story Like this one waiting for you tomorrow night, you know where to find them. But that is for tomorrow. For now, there is nothing left to do and nowhere left to be. Just the creek and the grass and the good heavy quiet of the ground. Good night.